in the national semifinal game against Georgia, Rodney Anderson, who, really hit his stride midseason last year, and by season's end, obviously was an elite back, and came into this year as really on anybody's, or should have been on anybody's Heisman Trophy possibility list. But in the national semifinal game against Georgia, he ran for 200 yards. A week later, Georgia versus Alabama, the
shut them
championship
down.
game, no Alabama running back ran for more than 64 yards against that same Georgia defense. So that defined, in my mind, certainly, I think everybody's mind, it defined Rodney as an elite running back, as obviously an incredibly important guy for the Sooners. And now they have to make do with, and I say make do.
Yeah, it's a good stable.
No, it's a nice, they have nice backfield depth. I tell you what, Garrett Nieming and I were talking today, and I think that Lincoln has to be careful to resist the temptation to use Kyler Murray too much in the run game because he's a dynamic playmaker, a phenomenal athlete. But you don't want to expose him more than you have to. At the same time, you got to use him because he's great when he tucks the football and goes with it. So now the burden on the run game falls to guys like Sutton, who's a shiftier kid, to Sermon, who's more of a power guy, and to freshman T.J. Pledger. Is that combination good enough to get them to the playoff? We'll see.
I like all of those guys. I absolutely think OU is still good enough to go win the Big 12, and if you're good enough to win the Big 12, you're probably good enough to make the playoff or at least be right there. But here's the thing. Trey Sermon, I love him. And in the right setting against the right team, your offensive line blocking the right way, he can mow dudes over and be incredibly effective. Sutton, he's got a lot of juice. We saw it yesterday against the right team in the right game, the right setting. He can be spectacular. Pledger brings a lot to the table as well. But Rodney Anderson brought everything you could possibly want out of a running back all into one package. And you mentioned the Georgia game. I don't think they've got a running back on the roster who can go have that kind of performance against a defense as good as what the Bulldogs were a year ago. I don't think you have a guy who can go get 200 in the Rose Bowl anymore. Does that mean you can't win a national title? I'm not saying that necessarily, but it makes it that much harder